So, now that we've wrapped up the big thing with Mammoth Mogul, maybe we can finally start to wrap up the plot we sort of left hanging when Sonic and friends got pulled into that whole mess. The cover is fairly good, with Sonic triumphantly holding the Sword of Acorns to the sky, while we have King Max and Uncle Chuck in the background, looking quite detailed this time. The background is of course non-existent, but I think it works well with what we have. We open to... oh no, Sam Maxwell art. Well, guess we know what we're getting into now. And look, I don't want to be too hard on the guy, I don't know him, but his art style is really off-putting to me. I generally don't have a problem with more anime-esque or exaggerated art styles, but this takes the exaggerated look of a typical big-eyed manga style, and then exaggerates it even further, to the point where it just looks way too unnatural, and it's pretty par for the course here. Anyway, we open on the freedom fighters arriving by airship and speaking with the king, who has apparently regained his sanity, only for the freedom fighters to all argue in favor of getting rid of the Robians, and pretty blatantly as well. Even when it's pointed out that Sonic's uncle is a Robian, he argues that he can't really trust him given how long he kept the existence of Sonic's parents a secret, though Sonic notes that he can't trust them either. This seems to spark another episode in Max's mind, and his calm demeanor falls away as he immediately orders his troops to mobilize with the intent of destroying the Robians completely. Meanwhile, several hours later, another ship is shot down over the war zone that Robotropolis has become, and it was carrying the real freedom fighters. Yes, we have yet another impersonation plot here. You'd think someone would start putting some sort of safeguard in place considering how often their enemies seem to perfectly mimic them. They run into a bunch of soldiers who ignore Sally's calling to them, but Sonic manages to catch one in a small cyclone, where they finally get some answers, being told that the Robians are attempting to escape, and are putting up a resistance against the soldiers who are, you know, trying to kill them. Of course, since the real freedom fighters weren't there, this is news to them. They run into a nearby building to avoid some mortar shells, where they run into a good chunk of the Robians, who are not happy to see them, since they think they all argued in favor of destroying them. And why would any of you buy this for a second after everything that has happened, especially after the whole Endgame fiasco? Oh my god, I am so sick of this narrative device. While Chuck is at least willing to hear them out, the other Robians are eager to pull their triggers, but Sonic manages to relieve them of their weapons and at least get them to listen to reason. Just before it looks like things are going to be okay, however, the soldier that they interrogated before shows up and shoots Chuck, like, to death. Or at least that's what it seems like. Sonic grabs the Sword of Acorns. I don't know from where, it wasn't like we established that he or anyone else was holding it before now, and threatens the guard with it, making it clear that he's going to kill the guy. Thankfully, his parents show up and manage to dissuade him from becoming the same sort of villain he's fought against for so long, and Sonic's acceptance seems to trigger some sort of magic in the sword, which flashes and reveals that they've all been under some sort of illusion spell, making them see and hear upsetting things, some of them not even remembering anything at all. And thanks to that, they all put two and two together and realize that it must be the work of Ixis Naugus. Sonic returns to the castle and calls Naugus out, finding him in full possession of the king. He says that he's been in control since their last meeting, that he took control of the king's mind when it looked like he'd vanished before, and after whittling down his mental state, he was able to take full control after that little illusion he concocted weakened his mental state even further. Before Naugus can use the guards he has control of to do anything, however, Sonic uses the sword he has obviously hidden in that duffel bag, and uses it to break Naugus's control over everyone in the room. Ixis takes off, obviously aware of what the sword is and what it can do about his magic, heading for the roof. The other freedom fighters catch up, because apparently Sonic took off without actually telling them about his plan, and Sonic takes off again, heading after Naugus to the roof. Naugus stands on the edge of the roof, threatening to jump if they come for him, but Sonic attempts to call his bluff, stating that the Sword of Acorn's very presence must be making him weaker. But Naugus pitches himself off the roof anyway, saying that if he can't rule, then no one will. Sonic leaps after him, grabbing the king's leg, and then we get another magical explosion, Deus Ex, that ends with Sonic coming to on the ground, completely fine, and with the king standing over him. It's never stated exactly what saved them, though it's safe to guess it was the sword because hey, we haven't really established what the sword's powers and limits are. Fun. Naugus' influence over the king's mind seems to have completely vanished, but he thinks it might have resulted in him being permanently stuck in his crystallized form. However, one quick reference to the sword and the stone later, and not only is the king fully restored to his normal form, but he also has the real crown of acorns on his head as well, because apparently, the Hall of Limbo, where the crown was kept, remember, was in his mind all along. And with that, the story abruptly ends. Well, that was a thing. As a story, it's honestly not terrible, but it does feel a little rushed, all things considered. As a culmination of what was being led up to with the king's erratic behavior, the long and stupid quest to find the sword and the crown, and the thing between Robians versus Mobians, it was an ending. It wasn't great, it wasn't terrible, it was just an ending. And I think Carl Ballers did a decent job of at least bringing that stuff to a close when everyone was probably pretty exhausted with all the varied side plots in the books right now. But it's a very by-the-numbers plot that moves a mile a minute and doesn't really give much time to breathe, and the abrupt and sudden ending and the Sword of Acorns just magically saving Sonic and the King without any sort of real explanation is pretty weak to me. It won't be the first or last time we've had a magical Deus Ex like that, but when it's used in such a straightforward story, especially one that's had this much build-up, it's made all the more tedious, honestly. I will give them credit for at least finally giving a reason for the king's addled mental state all throughout this, though I don't think that it was very well portrayed that he was being mind-controlled. It really just seemed like he was more of a raving lunatic than anything else. You could say that was kind of the point, but if you're going to do a big mind control reveal like this, you do kind of need to drop some breadcrumbs here and there, especially when everybody seemed perfectly willing to go along with the king, regardless of how crazy he was acting, and nobody seemed willing to question it. Until, you know, the whole genocide thing came up. Hell, if this issue is any indication, even genocide doesn't get people to question the monarchy. I will also give Sam Maxwell credit as well. He's not terrible in this issue. It's not amazing artwork, but this is probably the best that Maxwell's art has been since he started in the comic, and I like seeing that sort of improvement in an artist. But it still has the weird proportions, the off-putting eye size and such, and while the panels definitely flow better this time, the lack of background detail and the constant color shifting for mood lighting is really distracting. Though really, that last one is more on the colorist than anything else. Credit where it's due, criticism where it's due. I like King Max's crystallized design, but Maxwell's art doesn't really manage to portray him in any sort of sinister light. Even when it's very clear Naugus is who is in control here, Maxwell can't seem to make the king look anything more than adorable. Honestly, that kinda goes for most of the cast at times too. I feel like Jeffrey and Sally are going to break out into uwu speak here at any moment. Props to Chuck's death scene though, that was pretty damn brutal and graphic. Yes, it's a robot getting shot, and yes, it's an illusion, but it's still a pretty disturbing image when Chuck dies like that. Now, technically there's another story in this issue, which I guess was so important that they dedicated a good half of the special to it, but I'm not really going to dedicate a lot of time to it. It is an untold tale from Endgame, which is essentially just an expansion of the adventure that Bunny and Antoine had in Down Under, fighting against Crocbot and his forces there, and then riding the airship back. It's a decent expansion, but that's really all it is. It doesn't really expand on anything that happened afterwards. It's basically just them filling in the blanks that couldn't be fit into an actual Endgame storyline, which I appreciate, kind of, but there's not a lot you can do to really fix Endgame retroactively for me. It was just a bad story from the point of conception. It's also got some weird tonal issues, considering that the story was written by Mike Gallagher, who was always more of a comedy writer, and as such, there are several moments that feel like they're going for a more cartoonish portrayal, but it really clashes with Nelson Ortega's artwork, which is definitely better than the main story, though there are some times where the characters can look a little more angular than they should, but it's a lot easier to look at than Maxwell's art, if I'm being honest. Gotta admit, I like the way Bunny's drawn in this issue in particular, and there's some very nice expression work from Ortega, and they're only enhanced by Pam Eklund's inks and Ballers' great color work. So yeah, while I'm not going into detail, and the story itself is pretty inconsequential, it's okay. The entire book is totally okay. Nicest thing I can say about it. Next time, we're going to be covering Sonic the Hedgehog issue 57, and I've got one question for you all, and I hope the answer is yes. Y'all like clip shows? I'll see you all next time, everyone.